Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name's Diane. I'm from the Park City Museum, and welcome you to our Education and Collection Center. For those of you who came to the Glenwood Cemetery event this past weekend, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And for those of you who are our sponsors, thank you very much. We appreciate it as well. I have been asked by a couple of people tonight if we record these lectures. Yes, we do. We have it on the Park City Museum YouTube channel. So you go and just plug in Park City Museum YouTube and it'll come up. And then they're all there for you. So any other questions about that, just let me know. We can't get them on our website because our website can't hold it. So that's why we do it on the YouTube channel. So, all right, so let me introduce our guest speakers. Barb Martz has lived in Park City since 1973 and is currently a member of the Museum Board of Trustees and a volunteer researcher and tour guide for the Glenwood Cemetery. You would have seen her this past weekend if you were there. She has a bachelor's degree in history from the University of California and a master's degree in public administration from the University of Utah. When Barbara first came to Park City to ski in 1970, she bought a copy of Fraser Buck's book, Treasure Mountain home, and was fascinated with Park City's history, especially the piece about Patsy Coughlin and the friends stealing strawberries from a merchant's wagon on Main Street and the events that followed. Over the years, she has continued to research the Coughlin affair, visiting locations of the critical events and meeting with descendants of lawmen who knew Coughlin. And for those of you who were there this past weekend, he is buried at the Glenwood Cemetery. Brian Craig is a lawyer in a private practice in Logan, Utah, and a full-time faculty member at Purdue University Global, where he teaches online legal courses. He received his undergraduate degree from Brigham Young University and his law degree from the University of Idaho. Brian has more than 23 years of experience as a lawyer. He has written articles appearing in various publications, including the Utah Bar Journal, and is the author of several books, including one addressing cyber law and one addressing the legal legacy of the Stringfellow acid pits, a toxic waste Superfund site in the near Riverside, California. His latest book, entitled Utah Outlaw Patrick Coughlin, is the crime spree of a forgotten desperado, is a true crime biography about Park City's strawberry thief and the first person executed in Utah after statehood. The book is scheduled to be released later this year by Arcadia Publishing and the History Press. It is available for pre-order on Amazon and will be published January 13th, 2026. And you can check out his website, utahoutlaw.book.com, for more information. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara and Brian.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you all for being here tonight. Can you hear me all right? Too loud? Okay. We titled this speak about the tragedy of Patrick Coughlin, but it's more, Patrick Coughlin is the central character in the story, but it's a tragedy for more people than just Patrick, and we'll tell you about that as we go. Now, if I can use the clicker, we'll get started. Oops. Well, there. Light touch. A lot of our research was done with newspapers, historical newspapers that we got online at utahdigitalnewspapers.com. Or maybe it's org. Anyway, we got them online. And as we go through these, we find a lot of conflicting stories. And therefore, this is a hard lecture for me to give because I really don't know the truth of what happened. I've read different things. I've been different places. I've got my own ideas and a few facts maybe to back them up. But I really don't know what happened because there are so many varying stories. And this is an example. This was written in the Randolph newspaper after Patsy's execution. The editor of this paper had a last day interview with him, and last night, I guess, interview with him, and Patsy made a statement to him, and that was published. And he says, our readers may depend upon having a truthful report of the Coughlin affair. We cannot vouch for the truth of the statement made by Coughlin. We simply published it as he made it, word for word. The Herald reporter, that's referring to the Salt Lake Herald newspaper, has been giving vent to his spleen because we would not be pumped regarding the statement. He in one place says, Pat remarked to one of the guards, "Didn't I fill that fellow full through? For the Herald man's benefit, we will publish the statement from each and every one of the guards, if he wishes. Not one of them said anything of the sort. It is a falsehood." So this is what we're up against in our research. What's true and what's not true. And as a result, this is a hard lecture for me to give. Okay. Just a little background. What were the times like? What was going on at the time? The events that we're going to be describing tonight happened in 1895. But prior to that, in 1894, these two young men from Spring City, Utah, from San Pete County, were tending sheep in the mountains by Manti when a sheriff approached to arrest them for rustling sheep. Guns were pulled from the sheriff and from the boys. The sheriff was killed. They disappeared. They were not heard from. A little later on, in July of 1895, right around the time that things are heating up with Patrick Coughlin, there's an article in the Colville paper saying that the brother of Moen Coford had contacted the law enforcement in the city and said that his brother is working with an attorney and considering surrendering. And his whereabouts, he's out of the jurisdiction, so we assume he might have gone to Mexico, but we don't know for sure. The family knew where he was. But these boys did not have been missing since the time of this shooting, and this is when things started happening with Patsy. Okay, who is Patrick Coughlin? Pronounced Coughlin, which you'll also find if you do want to do any research on him, you have to check for the name Cochran because he's referred to as Cochran, and the 1880 census in Virginia City, Nevada refers to the family as Cochran, different spelling. So that it's pronounced, an Irish friend told me, Coughlin. Coughlin. He was born in 1873 in Massachusetts. His parents were Irish immigrants. They both immigrated separately, but as old teenagers, 17, 19 years old, something like that. He was known by the nickname Patsy, and he was the firstborn son of this family. 4 more children were born in Massachusetts. One little boy died there, but the rest of them moved to Virginia City, Nevada to follow the work in the Comstock mines in 1878. And after that sort of played out and miners are being laid off, a number of those miners came to Park City, the Coughlin family being one. We think they came here around 1883. Okay, let's go the right way here. They were part of the Irish community in Park City, which really was centered around St. Mary's Church. This is a picture of the St. Mary's Chapel up on Park Avenue, the one that still stands today. And let's see, now I'll get my pointer out here. This was a school. There was a school here. This was the school building, and here's the church, the one that still stands today. Up these stairs, there was a little house, and that's where the Coughlin family lived, all 11 of them. There were 9 children and the 2 parents living in that little wooden house. These stairs lead up to that house, and the children's pictures being taken, the school children. We know that the Coughlin children attended school there from records that we have seen. And my attention was caught by these 2 little boys sitting at the top of the stairs, so I blew that up. And I'm not saying, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is Patsy, because he would have just come down, sat on the stairs for the school picture. And it's just something about the way those little boys are sitting there. I just think that could be true. Okay. He had some misadventures as a young teenager. He had a good friend named Henry Wright, and he got caught in October of 1886. He would have been 13 at the time. Henry might have been a couple of years older, for stealing bottles of beer from the McPullen Bottling Company. And they were called before the judge in Park City. The judge gave them a real talking to and admonished them, and they said they would never do it again, so they were released on good behavior. And I guess he stayed on good behavior for a while. In 1890, his father, whose name was Daniel Coughlin, his father died from pneumonia. He was like in his early 40s when he died. So the mom is left with these 9 children. one of the children, did die. A little girl died right before the father did. The father did keep up his dues with the Ancient Order of United Workmen. He worked in the Ontario mine, and he had a life insurance policy of $5,000, which in today's value would be about $175,000, $180,000. So they had some money to live on. But in January of 1891, there was an article in the Park Record about a gang of boy thieves. Apparently, a barrel of whiskey had disappeared from a boxcar in Castle Rock, which is on the way to Evanston on the Union Pacific Railroad there. And the constable from Echo was called in to investigate, and that was Thomas Stagg. And Thomas Stagg found the goods at a ranch, and the adults that had the goods implicated some boys from Park City. 9 boys were arrested from ages like 10 to 19 or so. Patsy and Henry were among them. The younger boys were sent to reform school, and Patsy and Henry were sent to the Colville jail. From there, they escaped in February, and they headed to Butte, Montana. They were found in Butte, Montana. The sheriff wasn't looking for them. He was looking for somebody else who had escaped the jail, but he found them and brought them back. And the park record said that they should have left them in Montana. We were better off without them. So anyway, once they get back, they've all pled guilty. They go to the territorial prison in Sugar House, and they are given a year in the prison. They were released early. I think they went in and were booked in April. They were released in February. Here's a picture of Henry, and here's a picture of Thomas Stagg. Henry, Patsy's friend in crime, and Thomas Stagg, the constable of Echo. Then there was a shooting scrape. This is down at the Berry Brothers blacksmith shop, which is at the bottom of Main Street. That's just a picture of it from about the time. And this is a location. Let's see, I'll get my pointer now. Here's Main Street going down towards the railroad track. The depot is right in this area. This green building is the livery stable and the blacksmith shop. Right around here, a man named Patrick Haddigan came and confronted Patsy Coughlin and hit him in the face with a fist. Patsy said, "Don't do that again or I'll kill you." And he hit him again, this time with his loaded cane. And loaded cane is a cane that's been modified to have some heavy lead in it, so it really can pack a wallop, knock out your teeth, knock you out, kill you. And he hit Patty across the head with that. So Patty fell off the sidewalk, pulled a revolver, and shot Patrick Haddigan in the back of the left shoulder, caught him in the back of the left shoulder. Patsy got up, ran down the railroad tracks, and was gone for the evening. Haddigan told his story. Other witnesses told their story. There was a warrant for Patsy for investigation on assault with a deadly weapon. Now, the reason for this assault was a fight they said previously that was had at one of the fast houses or the brothels. And down here, this is the road to Deer Valley now, Heber. This building is a female boarding house. So that's probably the area where the fight may have happened then, over gambling, over a woman, who knows, but that's what happened. Patsy bail, his mother and a neighbor gave bail. Actually, by this time, Sheriff Harrington is the sheriff in town. He became sheriff in 1892. And here's some of the, we'll go there next, okay. He went to Patsy's house the next day, found him, but bail was posted, he was out. One of the bondsmen got nervous because Patsy went down to Salt Lake, left town, and so Harrington went down to get him, brought him home, and put him in the territorial prison for safekeeping. And he was there, this was in April 22nd, I think, of 93, when he went to the prison. And the trial was held in September. He was released, I think, October 1st or September 29th, somewhere around there. And he had been acquitted. Took the jury 15 minutes. One of the witnesses was a man named Robert T. Kimball, and he was the son of Bill Kimball, who had the Kimball stables. And I'm assuming he had business at the blacksmith shop and happened to witness this. And he was one of the, and Patsy was acquitted in self-defense. The next thing that happened was in 1895. Next thing we see in the paper. And on July 11th, 1895, Patsy and two friends are hanging out on Main Street. Nothing to do. I guess they could be working. The mine may have been closed because there had been a cave-in the couple days before. But they were on Main Street. They saw a merchant's wagon pull up with all the produce. A merchant named Sidney Pace from Provo was making deliveries to the markets on Main Street. One of the friends, Frank Kennedy, thought those berries looked pretty good, grabbed a box of them, started running down Main Street. And then Patsy and his other friend, Fred George, did the same and followed him. They sold those to a madam down in the red light district, and they all went home. The sheriff found out about it. He went to Kennedy's house, arrested him. Kennedy was given a fine of $20. And the word got back to Patsy and Fred what had happened to Frank. And it may have been exaggerated by the time it got there. So now they got scared. They got nervous. They thought, we've got to get out of town until Sheriff Harrington calms down. So they borrowed a couple horses. One of them was a horse belonging to Patsy's cousin, to his mother's brother's family, and the other was a horse belonging to another friend in town named Mike Malley, all part of this Irish community, right? They borrow the horses. They head out of town. They go down to Salt Lake. They head up Immigration Canyon like they're going to Wyoming, change their minds. Meanwhile, while they're in Salt Lake, they pick up another friend and another horse from a man named, his last name is Rule. He had the Rule, Golden Rule Mercantile down in the area of 9th East and 10th South. So here's what we have going on. After the strawberries were taken, it was followed by horse theft, evading arrest. He hadn't been resisting it yet because he had an encounter with Harrington. And there was, Harrington followed them. One early on a Friday morning, one of their friends said, guess who was in town last night, Sheriff Harrington? And Harrington says, you're going to show me where they are. You're now Deputy Earl Williamson. Take me to them. So he did. They went out to Wanship. In Wanship, they found out that the boys had their horses shod there and had bought some ammunition. And the sheriff apparently hadn't brought his rifle with him because the story goes that he borrowed a rifle from someone in Wanship. And he and Earl Williamson, the new deputy, head out towards Peoa looking for Patsy and Fred. You guys following me so far? Are you on your horses riding along? Okay. They get to Peoa. The boys never showed up there. They backtrack. Near Rockport, before the reservoir was there was a place called Crandall Creek, and it's still a site on the opposite side of the highway and the Rockport Reservoir called Crandall Creek, maybe a picnic or camping area. There's a stream that goes up a canyon. They took that, they went about 2 miles, and it was getting towards evening. They find a sheep wagon, and there's different stories. Sheriff says he opened up the back of the sheep wagon, and there was Patsy with a gun pointed at him. And Patsy says later, no, that isn't how it happened, but I don't know. But anyway, they had an encounter. Shots were fired. There was a bit of the leather from the saddle horn of Harrington's saddle caught him in the cheek, and there were stories that Earl Williamson had been hit in the wrist, but I don't know that those are true. They were kind of exaggerated stories. So anyway, here are some people to meet. Fred George, his buddy. Fred and Patsy are on the run now. Fred was actually, his mother died when he was born in Salt Lake. His mother died when he was about 4 years old, and his dad was a teamster who died in an accident when he was about 13. So he's an orphan. He's in Park City because he has a sister, an older sister who lives there, and he's living with her. And then there's Sheriff Harrington, Irish immigrant. He was born in Cork. He came to the United States as 17 years old, came to Park City in 1889. In 1892, he was elected sheriff. He was a miner by trade. Okay, so now Harrington, after being shot at, sends the word out to a number of lawmen, and they all kind of are on the lookout now for Patsy. Patsy, meanwhile, and Fred go up to Colville, make a right turn, head up Chalk Creek, over the hills. I don't know if you've been back there by Upton. Anyway, take that road. It goes over It goes over to a town called Wasatch, which has an off-ramp on 80 pretty near the the Evanston, the Wyoming border. And there was a young man who had a string of horses, and he it stopped by Patsy and Fred and was asked if he wants to trade horses. He says, no, can't do that. And he says, but if you need a place to rest, there's this Palmer Shack about 2 miles north of here. And so no one's using it. You always go there and rest your horses. So that's where they said they would head. So they head that way to the Palmer cabin. The young man with the horses goes to Wasatch, and they let Thomas Stagg, the constable in Echo, know about this incident. He goes to Evanston and gets a posse. The posse consisted of these people: Robert Calverley, Ed Dawes, and then there was William Red was his nickname, Taylor. And I don't know much about him, but I found someone with that name living in Evanston, who's actually buried in Evanston, who was about 23, 24 years old at the time of this, and he may have gone along with Calverley. So they go to the Palmer cabin. They arrive about 1:30 in the morning. There's a picture taken the day after the incident of the cabin. Pretty sturdy cabin, right? Anyway, apparently they get there before dawn, and then to hear the stories, I won't even go into them because they really differ on who shot when, who shot who, and all that. But the end result is Thomas Stagg was shot in the head and probably died instantly. Edward Dawes, was shot in the side through the lungs and did die. Patsy and Fred said he was still alive when they left. They gave him water. They gave him, tried to make him more comfortable. Now, they did take his guns, and they also took the gun of Stagg. And Patsy's gun, which was so worn out and old, was apparently broken up and left there. But this is a picture that was used at the trial to describe the scene of the crime. So now to switch here, and I'll hurry up here. This is where they parked they came on a wagon from Evanston down about 8 Mile Road, pulled up here, parked here. Calverley and Taylor went to this area. Stagg was over here, and Dawes was behind a post. There's the cabin with a little door and a little window. And the story goes from, you can talk about that in the trial, about the evidence in the trial? Should I wait? We'll let him wait. No, we'll let him wait. I want you to have time for that. Okay, so we're going to move on. You can wait. This is what it looks like today. And I think about 2005, I didn't take this picture. This picture came from someone in Evanston, but in 2005, I went to the site with Hal Compton, and we kind of poked around. And two cowboys, this is private land, it's the Deseret Land and Livestock, but two cowboy farmers, ranchers, whatever, that had access, took us there. And it's really quite bleak. I don't remember those trees, but apparently they're there now. This is looking towards I-80. This is north of I-80. So looking south towards the highway and the railroads. So what happens next? The headlines start hitting the papers. Oh, I forgot to mention the reason the reason that the dawn came and the boys escaped. The other two that were not killed, took off back to Evanston because they had run out of ammunition. They came back the next day with a larger posse, and that's when this picture that I showed you before was taken. That's with the group that came back. When they got there, cavalry said, start shooting. So it said that they shot like 300 rounds into the cabin to scare the kids out. Well, all in all, I believe that there were somewhere around 500 bullet holes going through that cabin, and they found 12 bullets in the straw mattress inside. Where the boys were, I don't know. But you can think about what might have happened. But I don't know how they got out. But anyway, they had varying stories. So the headlines, this is the park record. It's August 3rd, much later than the incident. The incident at the Palmer cabin was the early morning of July 30th. So that day, the boys take off. They head up the mountains over Monte Cristo. They drop down into Huntsville. and they continue on to Ogden and down to Salt Lake, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this is the kind of headlines where wild excitement. Patsy Coughlin and Fred George kill 2 officers and wound others. Okay, this was in the Salt Lake Tribune. If captured alive, they are almost certain to be lynched to the nearest pole that will support a crossbeam. And the story is that when the boys got to Ogden, they asked someone to go get them a paper, and they're reading this. So they're feeling pretty threatened. On their way down to Ogden, they went through Huntsville. So the Shooting Star Saloon was built in 1879. Chances are, if you ever stop in there, Patsy and Fred may have been there on July 30th of 1895. Not, I don't know, just saying, just maybe. The boys were missing in town. They got down to Bountiful. They rode from Ogden alongside kind of a caravan of produce merchants taking their product to markets in Salt Lake. A patrol wagon from the Salt Lake Police is coming up the other way, and they see it, but they just try to be real casual and continue riding alongside these produce wagons. And then they notice that the wagon turns around and heads back. So they take off. They're just around Bountiful. They take off to the east, go up over the hills, and drop down at the top of City Creek Canyon. So that's where they are now, resting their horses. The police find them there and start shooting. Who shot first? I don't know. But the horse that Patsy was riding is shot. It's not killed. It just got a bullet lodged in a muscle. And Fred's horse is pretty much lame. So they leave the horses. They head on foot. The sheriffs get up to the top. It's just all full of brush. They fire in there. Nothing happens. They go a little further. The sheriff's bunch of police. They find the saddles, the bridles, the blankets. The boys are now on foot at the top of City Creek Canyon. They say that night that they slept someplace near Mount Olivet Cemetery. They don't say too much what they did, and I don't know if they did. I haven't come across it, but they may have gone to Milk Creek Canyon area. But they're on foot now, and this event let me get my calendar out here. I remember the dates. The shooting at the top of City Creek Canyon happened on August 1st, I think. Yeah, on August 1st. This is a Thursday. And then they just disappear. And that's why we get the headlines. We think they've escaped because they're getting too much sympathy. The people of Salt Lake sympathize with these boys because, and maybe you've had a chance to read this, it is true they have ridden hard and run a great many risks. And they're scared to death is my feeling about it all. They acquire a couple of horses outside a saloon in Murray. It's called the UP Saloon. They ride those horses out towards, they're heading toward Nevada. They get south of Grantsville, and this would be Saturday night that the horses are acquired. The story goes, they took them. The story goes, someone said, here's a couple of horses you can have. But they end up at a place called the Third Term Mine and a place called South Willow Creek Canyon in south of Grantsville. And there they are surrounded. They went to sleep for a couple hours. They slept until the sun came up. And when they wake up, they're surrounded by the posse from Tooele County, led by a sheriff named John McKellar. And these are the headlines. They surrender, captured at last, and captured August 5th. That was on a Monday morning. The horses leave Murray on Saturday night. They on Sunday they have dinner at the mine, and they're captured early at dawn Monday morning. This is John McKellar. He is the Tooele County Sheriff who was there to arrest them. And I met his grandson. My husband Ken happened to meet him at an historical society meeting down by Fort Douglas, and casually talking, found out about him being the son of the sheriff. So we got together with him, went out there. He took us to the place of the capture, and told me more about his grandfather, and told me my grandfather always kind of liked those boys, and he was always affected by the tragedy. Thought none of it should ever have happened. He made the arrest. And now we go on. This is the escape route, just in case I lost you along the way. The berries, the berries were stolen in Park City. They spent some time just kind of messing around between Immigration Canyon and Salt Lake. Come back to Park City, leave the next day, head up to Wanship, and there they have their horses shot. Then they go up this Crandall Canyon. Right here is now the reservoir, Rockport Reservoir. Now Sheriff Harrington is following them, and this is where that shots are exchanged. Harrington and Williamson go back to Park City, and the boys take up to Colville. Here's the road up to Wasatch. This is the Palmer Cabin where the shootout takes place. Up over the hill to Monte Cristo, down to Huntsville, Ogden, and right about here in Bountiful is where they make a turn to the east. Am I going the right way? Oh, farther down. Here they make the turn to the east and take on foot. They are now walking down to Murray where they get some horses and right on out towards Tooele, towards Grantsville, and this is where they're captured. And that was, I think, about 200 miles. And from the time of the shootout at the cabin where the deputies are killed, it's like about 6 days. They covered that, and that's where they ended up, and that's where they were. They're captured, and now Brian will tell you what happens next.
Great. All right. Thanks, Barb. Yeah, and as Barbara indicated, one of the challenges that we faced in research is sources, right? And so we look at newspaper articles. I also looked at, there was the Utah Supreme Court decision from the Utah Supreme Court in 1896 as a source. And then we also had the application for the Board of Pardons. And one of the things that I uncovered was the handwritten affidavits by the jurors in the case. And so you can research those and read those affidavits, which is a sworn statement. So we'll talk a little bit about the trial. So they're captured. George and Coughlin are captured in Tooele. Then they're transferred by train and arrive in Salt Lake City. And there are hundreds of people in Salt Lake City when they arrive. And because this was front page news. So, what's the other one? So we have the arrival of our two outlaws, and we have George and Coughlin. So we have Coughlin is on the right-hand side here. And so we have them captured. This is probably one of the best photos that we have. And they were originally spent time in the jail in Salt Lake County, and then were transferred by train, and eventually they were arraigned there. Arraignment is just a first initial appearance, originally just on the horse thievery. And then back, you have to put in context, this is 1895. Horse thieves were not treated very nicely in 1895, right? I mean, they were strung up, and then they were also suspected of shooting two lawmen. So we have the two outlaws, and eventually the case gets assigned to Judge George W. Barch, and he was the judge in Ogden. And this is a photo of Judge Barch, and give you a little bit of background about him. He was originally appointed as a district court judge, had not been a judge for very long, and later served on the Utah Supreme Court, one of the original justices on the Utah Supreme Court. So he presided over the trial and made some key decisions that affected it. The trial was held in Weber County. This is an image of the historic courthouse there in Ogden for Weber County. And the reason why the case was tried in Weber County, because that was in the first judicial district, where the venue of where the death of Dawes took place. So it was a question of where was the proper venue, which county. While they were on trial, Coughlin served time again in the territorial penitentiary in Sugar House. And so he was, there's an image of the territorial penitentiary in Sugar House, which is, and Uh, and eventually the case gets fast tracked. Nowadays, a murder trial, you're probably looking at least a year before you go to trial. This was about 2 months. Okay. So they didn't, his lawyers asked for more time. And so you have to kind of think of context, because Barb talked about he had previously had another trial where he was found not guilty of self-defense. So he felt a little, I think he felt maybe a little bit confident, perhaps, about that. And but this is during the time of in 1895, where individuals who were accused of murder, they could not testify in their own behalf. That was, and it wasn't until later that the U.S. Supreme Court held under the Due Process Clause under the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution that a person who was accused of murder could actually testify in their own behalf. At this time, the accused could not testify, so they had to rely on other witnesses to testify. So the case eventually went before a jury, and they actually had 2 different trials going on at the same time. We had Fred George trial, and then we also had Coughlin's trial that were going on at the same time. So we had the witnesses for the prosecution and for the defense, and we had the lawyers. One of the prosecutors, McGinnis, he was actually had been the prosecutor in the Hattigan trial where Coughlin had been found not guilty. Well, he got a second chance to go after Coughlin in this one, and this time he was had a little bit better set of facts against Coughlin, and eventually you had the prosecution witnesses and you had the defense witnesses. McGinnis, interesting thing about him, he had served on the Wyoming Supreme Court, and he was actually the judge for the that had actually sentenced the Sundance Kid in Sundance, Wyoming. So he had a history of dealing with outlaws. And anyway, so that was there were 2 prosecutors, and then we had the 2 defense lawyers. And we had different witnesses that testified. One of the witnesses was Calvary, and he testified. And Coughlin, he did claim in some of his accounts that we read in news articles, was claiming self-defense. There were several other defenses that were raised if you read the Utah Supreme Court decision, and several different issues. They tried to admit evidence. They only tried him for the murder of Dawes and not for Stagg. And why did they did that? Well, that's a good question, but probably just prosecutorial discretion. But they admitted evidence also of the killing of Constable Stagg, who was the Echo constable at the time. So that was one of the issues that was raised, is the admissibility. There was also several other issues. Ultimately, went before the jury. The jury got the case at about 10 o'clock on a Friday night. The judge gave him about an hour to deliberate, and then he sent him home. And they came back the next day, Saturday morning. They deliberated for about another hour or so, and then they came back and found him had found him guilty of murder. And then we had the sentencing. And so Judge McGinnis, Judge Barch at the time, if a person was convicted of first-degree murder, that there was really no other sentence that could be imposed other than the death penalty. The only choice was for the defendant, whether they could choose hanging or whether they could choose the firing squad. So those are your choices. So Coughlin, when he said, I'll take lead. So he chose firing squad. And so the news accounts, they show that his mother, who was in the trial at the courtroom, Ellen, and she's bawling and crying and saying, no, no, no. And she was under the impression that he had a choice, that he was choosing the death penalty. She didn't understand that he was going to face the death penalty regardless of being convicted of first-degree murder at the time. And so he chose the firing squad over hanging, and then we had the appeal. And Dawes, Fred George, he also was found guilty, and his case also proceeded. So then we had the appeal. So we went go through the appeal. So this is right it was right at the time when Utah became a state. So the killings occurred when Utah was still a territory. And then we had Utah was admitted to the Union. And here in 1896. So you have to put in historical context. So we had the brand new Utah Supreme Court had just been put in place. So they were the ones that were deciding the appeal. And so they met at this the Salt Lake City and County building, which was Utah's first capital. Has anybody ever been in that building in Salt Lake City? So yeah, some of you might. There are a lot more trees now if you go there. This is a photo of the city and county building in Salt Lake, which also served as the original capital for Utah at the time. And this is also where the Utah Supreme Court met. So the Utah Supreme Court met and they decided his fate. And so the Chief Justice was Judge Charles Zane. And there's a photo of Judge Zane. And he in the opinion in the Utah Supreme Court, People v. Coughlin, said, "We find no error in the record. The order and judgment of the record below are affirmed." And one of the interesting things is Judge Barge. He was the trial court judge that presided over the trial. By this time, he had been elevated and appointed to the Utah Supreme Court. And he didn't recuse himself, right? And so he actually heard oral arguments. Now, his name doesn't actually show in the final written opinion, but he was at the time, which raises some question. If you have the trial judge, who's the same judge that hears it on appeal? I mean, that raises some questions, right? But ultimately, they reviewed the record and found and affirmed the conviction and the sentence. And then here's a newspaper article from the Salt Lake Herald. Coughlin must die. State Supreme Court overrules his motion for a new trial. And then again, Fred George, his motion was also denied. And so he was sentenced to life in prison. Eventually, Coughlin's lawyers appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, right? After exhausting all their appeals before the Utah Supreme Court says no, affirm that the sentencing, the conviction and the sentence, and ultimately reaches the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court, and here's considers the petition, did not grant review. What's called certiorari is at the time. And one of the arguments they were making is that Utah was a territory versus a state at the time, and under that. But the U.S. Supreme Court decided not to take up the case. And Chief Justice John Marshall Harland, here's his image, decided not to take up the case. So then we have the last ditch appeal is before the governor, right, and the Board of Pardons. Now, back in the time, we had the Board of Pardons that consisted of the Utah Supreme Court justices, who again had already heard the appeal, the Utah governor, Heber Wells, our very first governor after statehood for Utah, and then we had the Attorney General. And that was who consisted of the Board of Pardons and Appeals. And if you read the application, and you can see the handwritten affidavits, there was a petition signed by hundreds of people from Park City that signed in favor of to commute the sentence, at least reduce it from the death penalty to life in prison. One of the things I unearthed and found that was extremely intriguing were the handwritten affidavits from the jurors themselves. So we have, again, there were 12 jurors, as far as we understand, and over half of them hand-wrote affidavits. And an affidavit is just a sworn statement made under law that was notarized. And these affidavits from the jurors, and his lawyers did a really good job. I mean, they were really, track down those jurors and those affidavits in the application to the Board of Pardons. And one of the on the slide here that we have, the image is of AJ Shoup, and his handwritten, he expressed doubts as to the guilt of the defendant. That raises a lot of questions to me as a lawyer, right? If you have now the U.S. Supreme Court has held that to impose the death penalty, that it can't be the judge, that the U.S. Supreme Court has held under the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution, is that the jury has to make those findings of fact in support of the death penalty. And there's the guilt phase, and then there's the penalty phase in any death penalty case nowadays. But back then, Justice in 1895, that was not the case. So the jurors, and if you read the affidavits, is they agreed only to find him guilty if he would not face the death penalty. And that's what they wrote in their affidavits. But the judge didn't explain that to him. He didn't give him the proper jury instructions to the jurors. So we have multiple jurors that are writing affidavits to the governor to appeal this sentence and expressing doubts as to the guilt of the defendant and saying that we only agree to it. But you have to consider the political context at the time. Governor Wells, brand new state, Utah, had gone through a very tough time of being admitted as a state and was facing probably a lot of political pressure, right? And didn't want to seem as soft on crime for two outlaws that were convicted of killing two lawmen, right? So they denied the application. And then ultimately the case goes before Governor Heber Wells, and he refused to commute the sentence to commute means like reduce it from the death penalty to life in prison. And they refused to do that. And then ultimately went before the judge in Randolph, and then the judge in Randolph issued the death order, and then ultimately he was executed by the firing squad at the field where the crime took place, or near there. And it was actually Sheriff's Cavalry that oversaw that, the execution. I'll tell you a little bit about how executions work for. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The courthouse, that is the courthouse as it was in 1896 when Patsy is returned there for resentencing. And that statue is a World War, the statue wasn't there, and that's a World War I veteran statue. There's a different courthouse on that same location. This is the jail that he was imprisoned in for 10 days. And it was really near the courthouse, but it's since been moved. It's still in Randolph. And that's a picture in the bottom here. Let's see, this is a picture looking inside the cell, that one little window, and this is the door to the cell. Pretty secure. I guess a lot more secure than the Colville jail was, and certainly much more secure than our dungeon is. And that's where he was for 10 days. He had some visitors. Frank Kennedy came from Park City to see him. And then at the end on a Saturday, the Reverend Father Thomas Galligan from St. Mary's Church went there with Dennis Lane. That was Patsy's cousin from whom the horse was stolen or borrowed. And they were there with him from Saturday until the time of the execution. On the night before the execution, his mother also makes it. This is December 14th. It's snowing. It's cold. The trains aren't going through there. I mean, the trains go to Evanston, but there's no train to Randolph. And they said the wagons can't go, but she did get a ride the next morning from Evanston. This is now be Sunday. Sunday, she arrives in Randolph and spends from about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night until just after midnight with Patsy. And it's what you read in the Roundup, if you'd like to take a look at that online, is a very touching story of their last 4 hours together and things they talked about. But anyway, that's the jail. That is the building where he's held. That jail was reinforced with nails, so no one could saw through the boards. But anyway, I'm sorry for interrupting. Back to the execution.
Yeah. So thank you. And then so we have the execution. It's an open field, and it was overseen by Sheriff Cavalry, who was part of the posse, and that had originally had the raid on the cabin. And so basically the way they do it is they tie the inmate to a chair. He's seated in a chair, and then they have 4 rifles that are pointed, and then there's a target placed over the heart, and then there are 4 bullets. And there's actually, you can read some interesting stories about some botched executions by firing squad. There was one in Provo where they didn't tie him down and he moved at the last minute, and then it hit his, it missed the heart, and it took him about 25 minutes to bleed out. So yeah, it was the Evanston County Sheriff for Uinta County in Wyoming, Robert Cavalry, who participated in the siege, he oversaw the execution. And so here are some images. You can see the target of the diamond and where the bullets were hit. And then you can see here, that's Coughlin, who's seated. And then that's the target placed right over the heart. And then we have the riflemen that were in the tent, and they cut holes because it was cold. So they were in the tent at the time, and then fired that shot, which is probably only about 15 yards. Not a very hard shot, for someone. And then they just aimed right there at the heart. It was in near Randolph and near where the cabin. Yeah. So yeah, at the time they would do the execution at this. Here was in the same county. There were other cases. The one in where they would do it on the courthouse lawn. And that's where they would do the execution. Now where we have the execution is at the state penitentiary. So just different methods of execution. Here's another photograph of the execution with the executioners on horseback. Yes. How many shots? They would get one shot. So the question was how many shots there are. Each rifleman would get one shot. There are 4 riflemen. And nowadays, one has a blank, so to create some doubt. Yeah, so they would have 5, 4 with live rounds, 1 with a blank, so that there's some doubt as to who fired the last shot. So.
I believe that pictures of some of the guards from Randolph, the sheriff, and the deputy, because I believe the people, the executioners inside the tent were not known to the public.
Yeah, so and they were about 100 people there at the execution. And then you can see that they've got the rifles there. Yes, yeah. The question is, was it advertised? And word got around. Here, the execution itself made its news all the way to New York papers. This was from the New York Journal in 1896. Described Coughlin as Utah's worst desperado. He was the worst desperado in the territory, and as fearless as he was bad. So you can have the artist rendition here again, tied to the chair, and then you have the rifleman. Do you want to talk about Father?
Yes. There are a number of articles in all different local papers that talk about Patsy's demeanor just before and the execution. The sheriff said he was cheerful. He slept well. He had a fried chicken breakfast. He was heard singing in his cell, but they also told that nights before he woke up with a bad dream and was telling Johnston, the guard, Johnston, don't let them take me. He was still always worried about being captured and being lynched. And I think the fact that he knew he was going to have this dignified execution that gave him some strength, but he was extremely brave. They said he would look pale from his confinement, but he was calm. He sat, he cooperated. Sheriff Dixon from Randolph was there with him, one of the last to speak to him, put his hand on his shoulder, the other put one hand on the right shoulder, one hand on his left hand, and told him, be brave, Patsy, it'll be over in a minute. And Father Galligan was there the whole time. And before the shooting, he gave him time for a prayer. And after they said the prayer, Patsy said, this is in the papers, I forgive all my enemies and I want everyone to forgive me. And then his cousin Dennis said goodbye, and they say Dennis was just sobbing. He was so broken up by this goodbye that it was hard to watch. But Patsy stayed calm. He said goodbye. Father Galligan stepped away, and then the firing happened. Galligan then stayed in Randolph, brought the body to Evanston. And I think that might be my next slide. Let's see here. Came with the body with Dennis. Meanwhile, Ellen Coughlin, the mother, was waiting in Evanston. And the body was in the care of an undertaker whose name was William Cashin. I think that's a great name for an undertaker. Anyhow, but this is a picture of Evanston at the time, and the railroad station is here. This is the building where it's called Beeman, Cashin, Mercantile, and Undertaking. That's where Patsy's body laid. And the newspaper in Evanston said that Patsy's had this last request, and it was, I don't want my body to be photographed. And they did honor that, and they did not. So there are no photographs of his body. But the write-up in the Evanston paper said it was very handsome in the coffin, and he was dressed in black, and the coffin was draped in black, and it was handsome was the word that they used, which I thought was interesting. So Ellen then was taken to the mortuary to take his body. They put it on the midnight train in Evanston and took that train to Park City, down probably past Wanship on the rail trail that we all hike and ride our bikes on, right? That was the way they got back to Park City. And they arrived at the, whoops, wrong one. Guess where? The Union Pacific Depot on the corner of Heber, the one that still stands. They arrived there about in the early afternoon. They were met by a number of friends, and the body was taken here up to the house, which is right next to the Catholic Church. The funeral took place at the Catholic Church on I think a Thursday, December 17th, about 2 p.m. Father Galligan, of course, presiding. About 200 people came, and then his body was taken to Glenwood Cemetery. It was winter then, so it didn't look like this. There was snow on the ground, and it was laid in the grave where his father and a baby sister were. Later, and he was buried there. There was an article in the Park Record that said, there's been a lot of, I'm trying to remember how it goes. There's been a lot of harsh criticism about the number of people who attended this funeral. He said, but the record feels that was out of morbid curiosity or sympathy for the mother and respect for Father Galligan. So there were probably 200 people that they say came. I'm just gonna check the time. See how. Do we have 2 minutes? Oh, good. 2 minutes. Sorry. I'm sorry to keep you all over, and then I want to give Brian a chance to talk too, but we're a little over time here. Whatever happened to these people? Okay. Fred George was pardoned, and the pardon letters were written by Sheriff John McKellar from Tooele, by the widow of Ed Dawes, who was the one that was shot, by Father Galligan, by many citizens. And I think I have with me a copy of the citizen signatures on the petition that was to no avail for Patsy. But he was pardoned about 1902, and after serving all that time in the penitentiary, he married a woman whose name was Epsie Jane Pace, who happened to be the niece of Sidney Pace, the strawberry merchant that where this whole thing started. He died in Park City about the age of 60. I think it was in about 1930 or so. From heart ailment. Henry Wright, there's a picture of Henry Wright out of his prison stripes. He was in prison for 5 years for rustling sheep in Delta, and he was there at the same time that Fred was. He was released in 1899. He went back to Park City. Eventually he married in 1907, I think, a couple of years after Fred did. He married another one of the nieces of the strawberry merchant. And John Harrington, the sheriff, his life was tragic. He got blamed. I don't know if he should have received any of that blame, but for the death of Patsy. But I don't think so. He was doing what he needed to do, and he may have gone out to see Patsy and bring him in and save him from getting into further trouble, but it didn't turn out that way. But his wife died in 1904, I think, from tuberculosis, a young wife in her early 30s. He had a little boy that died, was drowned in Poison Creek, Silver Creek, by Daly Avenue, and it would cross Main Street in a very rough stream runoff in May of 1897. he was not reelected sheriff in 96. And he became a miner again, went to Montana for a while, did come back to Park City. He became quite an alcoholic, and he ended up with pneumonia. He was in Ogden, and his cousin was with him, older cousin was with him. He died in the Broom Hotel in Ogden from pneumonia and incidental to his alcoholism, I guess. They said that was a secondary cause. And he is buried in the Glenwood Cemetery. His grave, along with his wife's and the little boy, is just 2 plots behind Patsy's. So if you go to Patsy in the Coughlin grave, then there's one more, and then that's where Harrington is. We did. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry, folks. And the Coughlin family, they stayed at their little house next to St. Mary's until about 1923. Then they moved to Salt Lake for a while. The boys worked for the railroad. 2 of her boys worked for the railroad. And Ellen eventually moved to Montana with her sons, and she died in Miles City, Montana in 1936 or 36 or 30, somewhere around there, in her 70s. And she was brought back and buried here in the Glenwood Cemetery. Whatever happened to Kofod and Mikkel, I'll let you guys decide. Remember in July of 95, about the time all this started happening with Coughlin and George, they were thinking of giving themselves up because they thought they might get a fair trial. It had been long enough since the shooting, and when they told their story, they might get a fair trial. Do you think they showed up ever? They didn't. They didn't. And I think that's it. We'll let Brian finish up, and I'm sorry we've kept you over. Here you go.
Yeah, and so he was described in the park record as Park City's most notorious citizen. And I think it's an interesting tale, story and life from a historical context, kind of the end of the Old West, and certainly raises questions as to death penalty too. He was the first person that was executed by the firing squad after statehood in the state of Utah. I'll be presenting at the Utah State Bar Convention next month as a keynote speaker, talking a little bit more about that before legislators. Here's the gravesite from Constable Stagg that's in Echo. The book is entitled Utah Outlaw Patrick Coughlin, The Crime Spree of a Forgotten Desperado. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. Comes out in January. It's not too expensive. Here's the book cover. And if you're interested, go to utahoutlaw.book.com. We got more links to different documents if you're interested in learning more. So thank you, everybody. Oh, questions?
I just want to do this slide. This book where I first read about Patsy. There's a chapter here called The Box of Berries. Oh, and Deborah Kennedy, who is a granddaughter of one of the sheriffs or one of the deputies in Randolph, who showed me the jail. The McDonoughs, Gary and Roger McDonough, for all the information they provided. George McKellar, that was the grandson of the sheriff in Tooele County. Mary Wahlberg, she's the curator of the Evanston Museum. They have a great display there. If you're ever up that way or take a trip up there, visit their museum. Gordon Wright, who's here tonight. Thank you, Gordon, for your information. And the Park City Museum staff. And my husband, Ken, for putting up with me. Ken, I didn't put it on there. I ran out of room. But
All right. For any of you who want to leave, but anybody who wants to stay and ask any questions or any comments, yes. Yeah, the question was, how come one got the death penalty and one got life in prison? So that's a really good question. At the time, George was, it's actually kind of interesting, is if you look at the records, is they said that he was much younger than he actually was. And so I think his defense lawyers actually used his age as kind of an excuse, that he was supposedly under 18 at the time, but we found out he was actually 19 at the time. So I think that was part of it. And Yeah, I mean, I think it was considered, Coughlin was considered more of the ringleader, under that. So great question. Other questions? Same question. Yes, in the back. Yeah, so the question was who is paying for the appeals? Yeah, under current state law, it's the taxpayers who pay for that. At the time, as I mentioned, his lawyers, he had that life insurance money from his father. So I'd imagine that they were using some of that life insurance money to pay for his legal fees. But yeah, they would have appointment, but I believe they were private counsel at the time. But now, under current law, if you can either do private counsel or it costs millions of dollars on death penalty appeals, it's through taxpayers that pay for that. Question? Yeah. Yeah. So, So if you look, I looked under records. So George, he was actually baptized as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Mormon, and he at the time, and but Coughlin, he was a Catholic, and his family. And you have to look at the historical context, because this was during the time. We talked about some of the news articles is that they were receiving support down in Salt Lake City. And a lot of the people were kind of supporting outlaws because they had sympathy with the polygamous and view of the government, especially the federal government at the time. So there was a lot of sympathy during that period of time. And, there was the outlaw trail that ran through Utah, right? And Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and all that, right? And you have to look at the historical context. But yeah, there were some religious overtones. Yeah, and certainly Governor Wells. I mean, that was certainly an issue, with him. So, other questions? All right. Well, thanks everybody for your attendance tonight.